President Trump cannot stop talking about Venezuela to literally anybody who calls him. Kristen Welker of NBC, Joe Scarborough of NBC just made news talking to Trump about Venezuela. And Trump just told Joe Scarborough in a phone interview that Scarborough has now reported on, quote, "The president's response, Joe, on the difference between Iraq and Venezuela is that Bush didn't keep the oil. We are going to keep the oil." And to underline his point, Trump said his comments, I'm quoting here from the Scarborough report, said his comments were no longer on background and said in 2016, "I said we should have kept the oil. It caused a lot of controversy." Well, we should have kept the oil, the president said. "And we're going to rebuild their broken down oil facilities. And this time we're going to keep the oil." Well, I don't know what that means, Glenn, and I realize that Venezuela took a bunch of oil from our oil companies decades ago and didn't fully repay the oil companies, but that's literally decades ago now. And I don't know what Trump is talking about, but it seems as close as we're going to get to just an admission that this really is about the oil and that it was about seizing it, that we're going to seize their oil and not just about keeping it away from people like Iran and Russia and Cuba and other bad actors with whom Maduro had been cooperating. So, by the way, on the heels of that, he also says openly that we need to nurse Venezuela back to health before there can be an election. So we are there to get the oil. I don't know what the U.S. oil companies are saying about this. We searched but didn't find anything explicitly. And now instead of, focusing all of our efforts on nursing the United States economy back to health, we're going to be nursing Venezuela back to a place where we can trust its elections. We don't know when they're happening. So this is potentially an issue for Trump as we go forward to the midterms. I'll give you one other fact. He says, no, it's not. He says, and I quote, "MAGA is with me." He says, "MAGA loves it. MAGA loves what I'm doing. MAGA loves everything I do. MAGA is me. MAGA loves everything I do. And I love everything I do too." So your thoughts on all of that?
First of all, I think one of the big problems here is that this is a highly consequential action. You can call it a war or not a war if you want. I personally regard it as a war when we send our Air Force and bomb the crap out of multiple cities in a country, including their capital, after we have a massive military buildup and spend months bombing their boats off the international waters of their coast with the CIA covert operation inside the country that has lasted many months, invade their country with our military, take their leader, bring him back to Washington, and then have the president declare the United States now in charge of that country, ruling that country, governing that country. To me, that's a war, but you can call it whatever you want. And also, we don't know how far this is going to go. President Trump himself has said this may not be the end. We may put troops on the ground. He said he's not afraid of that. He's happy to do that if that's necessary. So there's a lot more that can happen. But even in terms of what has happened up to this point, there's two problems, major problems with it. The first one is this was never discussed during the campaign. We just had a major presidential campaign that went on for 18 months, as they always do. We had presidential debates, campaign planks. Nobody ever suggested that it was somehow important to our national security or otherwise in our interest to go in and effectuate regime change in Venezuela using our military and our CIA. That was never discussed. To the extent anything was discussed, there was a claim, which I agree with, that we have a major problem with fentanyl entering the United States. I think the big problem is, why do so many Americans want to consume drugs? But in terms of the supply, fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela. Trump himself said thousands of times fentanyl comes, the precursors do, from China, and they come through Mexico. And to the extent he proposed any solution, it wasn't going and doing regime change in Venezuela. It was barbing the drug cartels in Mexico, which we haven't done. And it suddenly switched to this other thing. So when you have that, the fact that we have a major election, there's been no real discussion of this, it suddenly happens, combined with the fact that the rationale keeps changing. Originally, we were told we have to do this because drugs are coming from Venezuela. As I just said, fentanyl, which is by far the most concerning drug, doesn't come from Venezuela. Cocaine, a small percentage, 7 to 9%, comes from Venezuela. These are all according to government reports under Donald Trump that his DEA and other agencies prepared. So, and also, just because we take Maduro out and leave the government in place doesn't mean that the drug cartels are going to disappear. We're not in Venezuela. How are we going to stop that or change And then Colombia and other countries, including Mexico, can just, even if the drug flow were impeded from Venezuela, just send more drugs into the United States. It's not going to impede a single iota of drugs in the United States. It's not going to help people who have drug addiction problems and want drugs and keep consuming drugs in the United States. Then we were told it's about liberating the Venezuelan people, except the entire communist government under Maduro is still in place. President Trump wants to leave them in place, at least for the time being. He's saying there, we don't want to have elections. There was an assumption that President Trump would put into power the opposition candidate, Edmund Gonzalez, who was declared the winner of the last election, or Maria Machado, the Nobel Prize winner. And he's saying, no, we're not going to put them in place. We're going to do business with the communist regime. There's evidence that there's more repression now in Venezuela because they feel like they've been attacked externally. So that rationale has gone by the wayside. And then what? We're going to take their oil. Do you know how long it's going to take to refurbish that oil infrastructure? And Megyn, even if we steal their oil, and I can promise you, if we do that, obviously a lot of people in Venezuela are going to fight very hard against the United States against that. We're going to be dragged into the middle of a guerrilla war of the kind that any country would fight if we say we're going to steal your oil for our benefit. But for whose benefit would that be? For the shareholders and the executives of Exxon and Chevron and these international oil conglomerates? None of that is going to flow to the benefit of the American people. So the question is, for whose benefit is all of this happening? I think Americans voted for no more regime change wars. We don't want to be governing other countries. We can barely govern our own. And they've made that repeatedly clear. I think it's one of the reasons why they voted for President Trump, because he promised not to do more regime change wars. And now suddenly, because MAGA loves it, and MAGA loves everything that he does, which may be true, but MAGA is a small portion of the voting population. I think it's going to create a lot of political problems for Trump in the midterms, but much more importantly, major geopolitical problems for the United States.
What we're seeing now is many conservatives who are kind of leaning into American power and openly using the term imperialism. Like, we're fine with that. You know what? We're the badass of the Western Hemisphere. We can do it. We have the military capability and might to show off in this way, which is a good deterrent for these bad guys to see, like, only we could pull this off. You know, like, good for us. You better not F with us. And, you know, if it takes messing with like this tin pot country, that's what I've heard people say, then too bad. Who gives a shit about Venezuela is what a lot of people are kind of saying. Like, they've effed with us for too long. They were playing footsie with our enemies who cannot have a greater foothold in the Western Hemisphere. You know, Teddy Roosevelt wouldn't have allowed this. Monroe wouldn't have allowed this. And why should Donald J. Trump allow this when he can send the Delta Force in there and boom, Bob's your uncle. Maduro's out. Yes, his vice president is still running the country, but as Trump says, we control her because we control the oil embargo happening around Venezuela.
This is not new, Megyn. I mean, nobody doubts that the United States has the most powerful military on the planet. China's caught up in a lot of ways, but overall, the United States military is by far the most powerful military force on the planet. I don't know anyone literally who doubts that. We are now spending $1 trillion a year, the first ever $1 trillion a year budget on our military. This is all going to the coffers of Boeing and Northrop Grumman and Palantir and all the rest of the military industrial complex that I thought we were supposed to be worried about and we're trying to weaken. So if you want to take the position that, hey, we're back to 2002, we're just going to go around the world bombing people, invading. That doesn't work. President Trump himself is saying, no, we're going to rebuild Venezuela. Are you able to hear me?
You're back.
Okay.
Yeah, now I got you. Keep going.
Yeah, so I was saying there's this attempt to distinguish between what this is and neoconservatism by saying, no, the neocons wanted to nation build. They actually really didn't. They just wanted to bomb and kill enemies, and that's what we were doing, and it actually redounded to our harm in so many ways. We tried this so many times throughout history. It's not like the United States has been shy about invading other countries and overthrowing regimes. We've been doing this for many, many decades, and look at what we have. $38 trillion in debt, an educational system and healthcare system that are totally broken, massive income inequality, people who can't buy a home. And now the idea is we're just going to double down and we're going to put more and more into our military. Honestly, I don't mean to be too psychoanalytical about this, but I do think this idea that, like, yeah, we're back and we're going to dominate the world. This is like a very psychological need that I think comes from weakness that a lot of people feel like they don't get to really go to war. Only a tiny fraction of our population are the people who fight in it, at least unless we have a draft again. People don't have an opportunity to really feel like they're purposeful and brave and courageous and connected to a mission. And so by getting to watch our military from afar carry out successful operations, people get to feel strong and powerful. Like you see these people walking around who don't really display any bravery or strength themselves, saying like, yeah, this is our hemisphere. And they're getting like this kind of vicarious strength from the bravery of others. I think it's a very damaging way to try and feel good about yourself. And the bigger problem is you can go and fight the rest of the world. The reason that big powers like England or France or Belgium or the United States stop being imperial powers is because it sucks all of your resources out of you. You're constantly slaughtering people and murdering people, trying to manage countries that you don't understand thousands of miles away, using all kinds of inhumane force. People decided that it wasn't worth it anymore. That's why imperialism was renounced. And this idea that we're going to go back to it, I thought the whole point of the Trump movement was we're going to focus our resources here at home. We're going to invest in our communities, in our people. We don't want to build up the military industrial complex. We don't want to constantly be fighting wars. And like overnight, all of that vanished. And now we're right back to this sort of like Lindsey Graham, Bill Kristol model of the world that I thought the MAGA movement was about renouncing.
Totally. You saw how happy Lindsey Graham was yesterday? It was like...
He was twitching with like ecstasy. I mean, I've never seen him smiling that much, and why wouldn't he? I don't blame him. He's getting what he wants.
No, I know. It's like Trump's been surrounded by actual neocons who really love bombing things, and the policies seem to reflect that. Now, Trump does what he wants to do, but one does wonder if you're hanging out with Lindsey Graham, whether that's a great thing as our president. Now, Trump did add to the story. I read this in the New York Times, and at first I didn't believe it because there's been a lot of bullshit going on about Trump. Like the Washington Post yesterday reported that the reason he doesn't want Maria
because she won the Nobel Prize
is because which just sounded like bullshit. And now already the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have both said that that's a bunch of nonsense. So you do have to be very skeptical. But the New York Times on Sunday reported, and I'm reading here, Mr. Maduro's regular public dancing and other displays of nonchalance in recent weeks helped persuade some on the Trump team that the Venezuelan president was mocking them and trying to call what he believed to be a bluff, according to two of the people who spoke on the condition of anonymity. So the White House decided to follow through on its military threats, which sounded kind of too cute by half. But then the Times reported this morning. President Trump is addressing Republican lawmakers at the House GOP retreat. That happened this morning at 10 a.m. In wide-ranging remarks, he praised the U.S. raid in Venezuela and said that he had been annoyed at the way the ousted Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, had danced as Trump administration officials escalated their threats against him in the weeks before the raid. Here is that moment today in SOT 1.
They've been after this guy for years and years and years. And, he's a violent guy. He gets up there and he tries to imitate my dance a little bit. But he's a violent guy. And he's killed millions of people. He's tortured. They have a torture chamber in the middle of Caracas.
So he mentioned the dancing. By the way, here's the dancing. In case you didn't see it, this is a video from November 22nd. Here is Maduro trying to imitate the Trump dance, which could be the reason he's in handcuffs in a New York City jail at the moment, which is mildly amusing until you really think it through, and then it gets kind of disturbing.
Here's the thing that's bothering me, Megyn. When I was comparing Trump's foreign policy instincts to the Democrats under Biden and Harris, and also especially Hillary Clinton, what always struck me about Donald Trump, and I said this many times on television and other places, is that when he talked about war and prioritized the most important thing about it, which is that people in large numbers die. You bomb people. And we talk about bombing, but there's people on the ground who are now dead, innocent people. He talks about the war in Ukraine. He always is emphasizing the number of people who are died in a way that I think is very important and very healthy. And he always showed this kind of aversion to war because of that. And it is true that in his first term, he was the first president not to involve the United States in a new war in decades. That really was true about him. And I used to talk about that a lot. In this last year, though, and I started noticing this when he bombed Yemen in the first month after criticizing Biden for having bombed Yemen, and then he restarted that bombing campaign. But especially when he bombed Iran in conjunction with Israel, and he started going around talking about how he and Netanyahu were war heroes, and it kept saying Netanyahu deserves a pardon for the criminal charges that he faced because those two are war heroes. And you could see Trump really taking this sort of like pride and sense of strength. He didn't, of course, fight in the military. There was the Vietnam War that he avoided, but he started feeling like he was a war hero, and he was starting to get this kind of positive feeling from ordering things bombed and from blowing things up and from showing that he was the strongest. And so in the first term, John Bolton tried to pressure him, so did Marco Rubio, to do regime change in Venezuela, and he was okay with it. And then he realized it was too hard, and he didn't do it, and that's what led to John Bolton leaving. And now suddenly we're back to, oh yeah, look what happened. He defied me, and I went in and we got him. Like, he risked the lives of soldiers and our military and potentially started a new war in Venezuela because he didn't like the fact that Maduro was dancing. And I do believe that was part of the motive, because none of the rest of it makes sense in terms of what it is that we did here.
A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, until January 30th. If you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, you just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy before January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, text MK to 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.